No, these aren't my clothes. I just went gay all of a sudden. Hello and welcome back to this Damp Idealistic Crusade, all film fans and screwball lovers. This video will be a review of the absolutely essential Criterion Blu-ray release, which is their Spine 1085, of a film that needs no introduction, one of the treasures of the medium, 1938's Bringing Up Baby. This is from a brand new 4K restoration, and this film has never looked or sounded this good on any release or iteration that I'm aware of or have even experienced. It wipes the floor with the previous versions on home video, and really I don't think the film has probably looked or sounded this good since its original 1938 premiere date. It is a absolutely incredible restoration effort, really advancing upon previous efforts to a incredible extent, and combined with the wonderful new extras package and porting over some of the old extras, it results in just an absolutely essential Blu-ray and one of Criterion's finest efforts on the format, which is really saying something. And talking about the film, it's really hard to find things that haven't been said before. Bringing Up Baby is one of the most famous and the most iconic of what is known as the screwball comedy genre, but it really occupies its own special place. It is a film quite unlike any other, and I think that is due to its absolutely breakneck pacing, its absolutely screwball characters in every single role in the film and its story. In fact, many people, including Howard Hawks himself, the film's director, later lamented that the reason why the film was not successful at the box office originally in 1938 was actually quite unsuccessful. But it wasn't the bomb that some people claim it was. But Hawks himself felt that the problem was that everyone in the film was a screwball, and there wasn't a quote-unquote normal character anywhere to give the audience some sort of grounding, and that's why it didn't catch on until years later when it became a cult film and it became discovered by critics and then hailed as the masterpiece it always was. And I think that is why some people don't really react to the film in the same way that most of us do. I have met a good number of people over the years who just couldn't quite get on board with Bringing Up Baby, so I can understand that. It has a particular pace to it and a particular unrelenting level of just pure mania and insanity that can make it a bit of a tough pill to swallow the first time you see it, because you can't quite believe what is going on and it just never stops. It very quickly builds to almost in places the fever pitch of a classic Warner Brothers Looney Tunes short, and then that doesn't let up and it just keeps going. But that's why it's so special and why it becomes so quickly endearing. It's a film that you do have to see a number of times, and once you start quoting the jokes back to the film and it's become part of your very being, then it has fully integrated itself into your brain and you've gotten locked in on its wacky wavelength. I am truly beyond glad that the film finally got the reputation it so richly deserved. It did take some time though, and it did become a sort of cult film. But once you see this film, its special qualities really jump out at you. So if you love this film, you really love this film. So there's no real in the middle with Bringing Up Baby. It's either people who just can't get on board with it, or the complete opposite, and it becomes part of your very being, and you wind up quoting the film back to itself while you're watching it for the 5,000th time. So it's an absolute treasure of not just screwball comedy, but comedy itself as a genre and the cinematic medium. It is one of the finest films of multiple people's careers, but Howard Hawks, Cary Grant, and Katharine Hepburn, who are all doing something slightly different that they never quite would repeat in any other films, even other screwball comedies that they made. This film, again, it has a particular identity and a DNA, and it is perhaps the most madcap of all screwball comedies, which is really saying something. And again, it's this particular quality that I think can alienate some viewers, but to those who didn't quite get on with it the first time, try seeing it again. I think it really does open up even more the second or third time. And I think that really helps if you didn't really like it the first time you saw it, or you just couldn't get on board with the complete wackiness. But to even try and describe the plot does the film a disservice, because screwball comedies are about a particular journey usually between two characters, and the plot is merely how they get from point A to point B. The joy is in the journey, and the romantic sparks that fly in the film between the Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn characters are some of the most joyous in the entirety of the genre of screwball comedies. And for me personally, I latched onto it immediately when Cary Grant's character of Professor David Huxley is so completely just closed off, very absent-minded type character, and even has very much Harold Lloyd-inspired glasses that he wears for most of the film, till they, along with the rest of his life, get absolutely destroyed by Katharine Hepburn's Susan Vance character, who you immediately fall in love with in the first, her first appearance, even though you totally see she's wrecking this poor guy's life and entire existence. And it makes it even more funny that you're laughing at this, because this poor guy is literally destroyed. But for me personally, not just the fact that it's Cary Grant and glasses, but the whole loser schmuck parts of the David Huxley character just immediately appealed to me. And so if I have a cinematic spirit animal that I feel is very close to some of my own life experiences, well, David Huxley is quite up there in that very short list that I can't help but so completely identify with. In terms of performances, the film is absolutely loaded with just an incredible character actor roster, and of course befitting a Howard Hawks film from the late 1930s, once he had really established himself as one of the top director names in Hollywood. This is one of his just absolute timeless artistic masterpieces, of which he has many, since he is obviously one of the great legendary Hollywood pantheon directors, one of the great artists, and in the pantheon of the great directors, that if anyone could ever be considered an auteur, if you believe in the auteur theory, well, the obvious ones are the greats in the pantheon, like Howard Hawks, John Ford, and so on. But it's amazing to see how Hawks could so deftly blend his style into comedy, and then go completely madcap here in Bringing Up Baby. He had done many comedies before this point, and sort of helped to invent the genre with his classic 20th Century several years before. That also sort of, with its success, and Frank Capra with Robert Riskin on It Happened One Night in 1934, those two films really ground and start what could be the formulation of screwball comedy as a genre, of which Bringing Up Baby, I do think, and I haven't seen every screwball comedy, but I've seen a good amount of them, but I've never seen any get to the same dizzying, manic heights of this film, and to such a degree, and then to maintain it throughout the entirety of the feature. So it's not just that David Huxley's trying to get his $1 million endowment for the museum. No, that's just the start of things. Things start to go awry as soon as he hits the golf course, and he's trying to impress Mr. Peabody. Well, he and the film will be with Mr. Peabody in just a moment, because Susan Vance comes into the foray, and Katharine Hepburn pretty much just takes the film and just drives it off into a complete opposite direction, into Wacky Town. And it is the joy of the journey, and to see how this poor man's life is disintegrated before his very eyes, and the audience, along with picking up Baby the Leopard, that the joy is in the journey, as in all screwball comedy films. But Bringing Up Baby in particular, because it becomes so manic so quickly, and Cary Grant is so beautifully able to render this in a performance that does manage to have tender moments in a few spots, but is believably increasingly frantic, that you can't help but completely sympathize with him. But also, as Howard Hawks has said in a number of interviews, it was something necessary, because the film is really transformative, to get him out of his very closed-off character, absent-minded self. And essentially, the Susan Vance character is how he finally lives a little and comes alive and stops being so cold. And of course, you can read into the film all kinds of things, because it does have a wicked sense of humor. So the fact that you have a very cold, closed-off male character wearing thick glasses who is obsessed only with his bone and then finding his bone. Yeah, you could read that a certain way, shall we say? But it's the inherent spirit of the film, this sort of anarchic humor and this just complete manic energy. With just again, every character in this film is a screwball. I think Howard Hawks was exactly right. And that's part of what makes this film so special, because everyone is crazy. There is no normal person. The Cary Grant character starts out seemingly normal, but he has issues of his own. And it really picks up and highlights the craziness in everyday inherent life to show that every single person has some screwball in them. That's just one of the many reasons why the film is so special, why it's so endearing, and why it's absolutely timeless. There is no other cinematic experience quite like the Howard Hawks masterpiece from 1938, Bringing Up Baby. And that brings us to the beautiful new Criterion Blu-ray release, Spine 1085. Now, as I mentioned before, this is from a brand new 4K restoration, and to talk about that and the transfer, as I like to do, I like to read from the actual notes so I can get the technical specs just right. So to quote from the booklet, the film is presented in the original Academy aspect ratio. The existing film elements are few and problematic, which is an understatement. Working with the Warner Brothers archive, Craig Johnson identified the two best pieces surviving: a 35mm nitrate duplicate negative from the British Film Institute and a 35mm safety fine grain positive. The archive scanned both elements at the MPI on the Warner Brothers lot at Burbank, and then the Criterion used their restoration team to piece those two elements together in order to create the highest quality version possible. Although the nitrate duplicate negative retained a good underlying image, it was riddled with mold that the digital restorers were unable to remove, while the fine grain positive was fourth generation and didn't look anywhere near as good. The nitrate film was sent to Image Protection Services in Burbank for a test on a wetgate scanner, which proved able to mostly eliminate the mold from the image. This element was then subsequently rescanned in its entirety in 16-bit 4K resolution on a Wetgate Oxbury film scanner. The film was finally digitally restored at Criterion Post using MTI Films DRS for warps and splices and Digital Vision's VNX for jitter and flicker. Then the original monaural soundtrack was remastered from the 35mm optical tracks found on the same picture elements using Pro Tools and Isotope RX. Now, that is quite a bit more extensive than the usual little paragraph you get in a Criterion release. And it's very good that they did that, because I think that's indicative of how much work had to go into this. This film was not previously restored because it was very difficult to do anything beyond just scanning the surviving picture elements, which is pretty much what you have on the old DVD and then the final release Laserdisc. The Laserdisc is a bit more warts and all, and both actually perfectly mimic the Museum of Modern Art print that occasionally would get screened. I was able to see that on two different occasions at some screwball comedy festivals and in art house theaters, and that plays exactly like the Laserdisc version, which is seemingly, I think, mastered directly from that, because it even had the same damage marks that I was used to on the Laserdisc release. Then the DVD sort of massaged that master a little bit, but it was still highly limited because it was just working from that same element scan. I don't know. It might even be from the same Laserdisc master, just spiffed up for 480p component DVD. But it always looked like there was room for improvement, but it just was that the elements or the technology was not there to try and pull more information out of the elements. But I think the biggest improvement here was mixing in that second source and being able, via a wetgate scan, to actually get past the mold damage. So it's the combination of the two sources and patching everything together, and also the audio work, that really makes this release shine beautifully. So it pretty much wipes the floor with the old releases. You don't have to hang on to them for any reasons. I do have a lot of sentimentality with the Laserdisc, because that's usually the version I went back to, because it had a slightly more warts and all appearance than the DVD, and is exactly like the MoMA print that used to occasionally screen at art house theaters. So picture-wise, this is the best the film has ever looked in my experience, and it is far beyond what the Laserdisc and the DVD could ever achieve. Now, as impressive as that is, I think the audio is actually even more impressive because there is a newfound clarity to this audio track that is nowhere to be found on the previous releases, which actually did have some inherent damage and ground hum and things. So neither of them sounded very good, and it was pretty much seemingly the best they probably could sound. So once again, I think the big improvement is finding that second source and being able to use the optical tracks from that, which, along with the restoration efforts and mixing in the two print sources, it is a night and day dramatic improvement on the audio as well. So for me, I think the audio improvement is actually more impressive than the picture improvement. So this is a disc I can wholeheartedly recommend just for the AV quality alone. This is a must-own simply for the picture and audio quality, not even getting into the extras. So if you were on the fence on this release, please go ahead and get this. If you're a fan of Bringing It Baby, I mean, we all hoped and waited for it to come to Blu-ray anyway, and the fact that it got Criterion instead of a Warner Archive release was a surprise, but the restoration efforts are really something, and I mean, it's a worthwhile upgrade for the picture. The picture quality is pretty much stunning. I didn't think this film could look this good in HD, but the audio is even more impressive. So my hats off to Criterion and Warner MPI. I mean, their combined efforts, along with the various restorers, I mean, it is really impressive, especially when you know how this film has been condition-wise. And if you've seen the previous video releases, you will know when you go into this Blu-ray release just how much work they had to do. So I think it's very, very telling that the restoration efforts take up a whole page in the booklet instead of the usual paragraph, because it took a lot of work to pull this off, and my hat's off to everyone involved because they really nailed it. This is far better than I ever thought this film could be on Blu-ray. Now to talk about the packaging, I really like what Criterion did with the art design. It's very simplistic, but when you look at the cover, I like the art they came up with that sort of mimics the slightly cartoon aspect of the main titles. You have the main two characters, plus you have baby represented, and then the leopard spotted motif carries on to the spine, and then you have the tail come onto the back of the cover. So it's like it extends off the front cover, goes to the spine, and then the spine wraps around and comes down onto the back cover. So I think it's a really beautiful design. It's very classy. It fits in with the sort of very arty design of most Criterion cover arts, but it also carries over to the inside, which is just a simplistic spotted leopard pattern, but given the fact that the spine and the rear sort of have the tail motif, it's like the case itself is baby walking around. So I really like that idea, even though it might seem that the interior is just pretty straightforward art. It does carry over the idea carried on by the spine. The disc label itself carries the same cover art with the classic Criterion C. And then the booklet is quite substantial for a Criterion release. Beautiful imagery from the film. That's from the classic nighttime chase through the woods with the butterfly net, which has always, to me, had a little feeling of A Midsummer Night's Dream. There's a little bit of a slight fairy tale aspect to their nighttime romp through the woods, which combined with the madcap intensity is really where the romance takes off finally, even if neither really wants to admit it. And the rear has another beautiful shot when they are, I believe that's when they're trying to wake up Mr. Peabody by just hurling rocks at his window. That, of course, goes as well as you might think it would in this film. So we get the lovely essay. This is by Sheila O'Malley. But the reason why this booklet is quite a bit thicker than usual, and one of the best touches, is it actually includes the Hagar Wilde original short story, reprinted in its entirety. This is the short story that inspired the film. There are, of course, differences because it is a short story, but it's really wonderful to get it printed in its entirety with stills from the film, very easily readable. But, it is, quite substantial. So the booklet does crack over 30 pages long. and it's a wonderful read. I know most fans of the film probably haven't read the short story or had access to it, so I thought it was a really nice touch to include that. Then you get the technical credits and the final credits and the restoration notes at the end. So for a Criterion booklet, it is kind of hefty, and that is because they did include the original Hagar Wild short story. So that is one of the best touches of this release. So then to move on to the extra features package, which is pretty substantial. It's not a 2-disc affair. It's still just a single disc Blu-ray release, but it's still a very nicely packed extra section. So the new restored 4K digital transfer with uncompressed monaural soundtrack. It does carry over the Peter Bogdanovich commentary from the DVD. It is a much more conversational track, kind of from a mixture of a fan perspective and an educated industry professional perspective. I know not everybody's a fan of this particular track, but Bogdanovich loads it with his own personal anecdotes, his knowledge and interviews, and friendship with Howard Hawks and Cary Grant. And so he has an insider's perspective on the film to an extent, and it's just it's a nice enough track to listen to. It's not the most, shall we say, informative all through and through commentary track, but I have always enjoyed coming back to it. And he sort of chuckles along with some of his favorite jokes from the film, and he is an avowed, Howard Hawks disciple and great fan of this film because, of course, he remade it as What's Up, Doc in 1972. So, of course, he loves this film. And it's even more touching to listen to now after his recent passing. It's definitely, there's a sad element to going back and listening to his commentary tracks. I know I had just re-listened to his track for Fritz Lang's Fury on the Warner Archive release just before news of his passing hit all the social media channels. So it's going to be now very sad going back to a lot of his great commentary tracks. So again, it's not the most informative track in the world, the track he did for this film, but it's still one I've enjoyed listening to when I rewatch the film and I pop in the DVD and start looking at the extras again. So I'm glad that is ported over, although I know it's not everyone's favorite commentary track. Then there is a great new Scott Eyman essay on Cary Grant, or should I say video essay. And Scott Eyman has done a number of fantastic essential film biographies, and just recently did the Cary Grant book, A Brilliant Disguise, which is probably now the best overall book on Grant there is. There's a lot of Grant books, but before Eyman's book that just came out, there really wasn't one I could point to say, this does the best overall job. There were some great memoirs and some great reminiscing books from people who knew him, but there wasn't a clear-cut great biography of Grant. So at least of the ones I have read, there are some pretty good ones, but the recent Eyman book I think is the best overall now, and the one I would point people towards if you want to know more about the legend Cary Grant. So it's great that he was able to do a video essay piece for this Criterion release. Then cinematographer John Bailey does a interview about the great cameraman Russell Meddy, who shot this film, and it's really surprising when you look more closely at crew credits to realize how many of the great cameramen worked on so many different films in the studio era, so many different great films. So you see that Russell Meddy, winds up shooting both Bringing Up Baby and then later photographs Spartacus. So it's like two completely different ends of the cinematic spectrum, and he was a master of his craft. And this film is incredibly intricate in its photography, which is something it doesn't often get credited for. So I'm really happy they were able to highlight his contributions, because this film does have a number of completely different styles and in terms of the locations used. And again, as I was saying before, when they're going through the woods at night, it almost has a very Midsummer Night's Dream sort of fantasy feel to the lighting, which enhances the whole otherworldly aspect of that. It makes it feel sort of like a magical forest in a slight way. So that is entirely due to the photography and the staging. So I'm so glad that was included here. Then another really effective piece that is another part of this film that doesn't get covered very often, or at least not in this level of detail, there is a new interview with Craig Barron on Linwood Dunn, the special effects pioneer. And you may think, well, what effects do you have to worry about in a screwball comedy? Well, when you have a leopard running around, obviously there's going to be times where there has to be some trick photography. And what's amazing is there are moments where there is no trick photography. Pretty much it's confined to earlier in the film before said a leopard decided to, shall we say, assert themselves a bit more on set during the shooting of the film. So there are moments where the more trained eye, or people who are much more aware, cinephiles who know much more about classical special effects techniques as they were emerging in the studio system and developing, the trained eye will notice some shots. If you look very closely, the editing is quite impeccable at hiding or drawing the eye away from these. But there are shots where you can't even tell, you can't even find the seams of the effects work. It is so painstakingly and beautifully done. So it's a really wonderful interview piece about Linwood Dunn's work on this film and a bit about his career as a special effects true pioneer. But in some ways, it's kind of it does spoil the fun a little bit by highlighting all the seams and things, some things that you may have not noticed before. So do keep that in mind if you want to keep completely entranced in the film and not ever notice the special effects work. You may want to fast forward those parts or look at them after you've rewatched the film instead of before you rewatch the film and then you're looking for those. But it's again, like the piece on the cinematography, it's really great that they are highlighting core elements of the film's magic that just don't often get covered. That continues with the next extra, which is a selected scene commentary about costume designer Howard Greer, featuring costume historian Shelley Foote. It's a really wonderful, very informative piece. It is pretty much, I can't remember the number of scenes, but it is a number of selected scenes from the film where they go over the costuming and the designs in great detail. So it's not a complete feature-length commentary track, but it is significant enough that you can actually sit down. I'm trying to remember the exact runtime. I think it's about 30 or 40 minutes overall of seeing commentary. So it is a pretty lengthy piece. It may not be a full commentary track, but it is definitely worth your time, and it really makes you think in greater detail about a lot of the costuming, particularly a lot of Katharine Hepburn's gowns in the film that she wears as Susan Vance in much greater detail than you may have before, and you can then really appreciate just the incredible design work that went into a lot of those, because they are extremely intricate, which of course makes it perhaps a shame that the seat of her pants and that one particular gorgeous gown in the nightclub gets torn, exposing her derriere for a brief moment in time. But that's just part of the magical charm of this film, and of course means your ever convenient Cary Grant has to be posted on your rear end to cover said tear. Then moving on, we have the excellent 1977 documentary entitled Howard Hawks: A Hell of a Good Life. That was made by Hans Christoph Blumenberg, and it does have the last filmed interview that Howard Hawks would ever do. I had seen this before. It's been uploaded online on YouTube many different times, or it's been included in some releases as an extra, I believe. Usually not in the best quality, but it's really great to see it here in its entirety, in the best quality that can be managed. It is a very, very open and forthcoming interview. You actually get footage. It's Howard Hawks talking in his actual house. And again, it is just shortly before he passed away. So he is significantly up there in age, but he's still recounting anecdotes and memories and sharing his own personal philosophies, and he's still pretty much sharp as a tack and just unbelievably fascinating to listen to. So you could just watch that for hours and days on end. It's an essential documentary for Howard Hawks fans, and it's a perfect inclusion for this release. So it makes absolutely perfect sense that was included here, and it is a wonderful documentary to go back to when you're re-entering the world of the of Howard Hawks's filmography. Then there is an audio interview from 1969 with Cary Grant, where he is remarkably candid and just as charming as he ever was in any film, which is pretty much how you encounter Cary Grant in every interview or that he ever gave, or just a remarkable sense of who he was, even outside of the Cary Grant persona and image, which was such a vivid image that it was hard to separate it from the real person. But he is remarkably just humble and candid, and it's just something you wish could go on for hours and hours and hours. And it seems like a precursor to those wonderful question and answer event nights that he did really towards the end of his life in the 1980s. Which, if you're a fan of Grant and you haven't ever looked at some of those, there's actually a great book about those nights that I believe it's called My Evenings with Cary Grant, which is essential. And I think some of those did have some bits that were recorded or filmed, so you can find little snippets of those. So this very much seemed like a precursor to that, those question and answer sessions that he did late in his life. But it's a wonderful inclusion and another just a treasure found in the extras package. And then we have actual excerpts from a taped conversation from 1972 between Peter Bogdanovich and Howard Hawks. So this is literally sections of some of the legendary Bogdanovich recordings that he did with the surviving legends that he could get to actually talk to him and then listen to his endless questions, which of course we all would do. It's just that we weren't around at the time. But it's going to obviously repeat some of the material that Bogdanovich covers in his commentary, because he was on a personal, friendly basis with Howard Hawks, and of course had these tapes to reference from when making this commentary. So this is essentially getting it straight from the horse's mouth, because it is the original taped conversation recording, and it is just, again, a treasure to listen to. It's a treasure that we even have this, and it's amazing when materials that Bogdanovich originally taped get released in their pure form like this, because you get that sense, the you are there feel, like you're just a third person in the room, just on the other side of the tape recorder, but unfortunately you can't ask any questions yourself. So that was a really great inclusion. So that rounds out the extras package. It doesn't port over everything from the DVD release. The DVD was a 2-disc affair. The second disc included the biography documentary on Cary Grant, and then it included the vintage Richard Schickel, Men Who Made the Movies documentary on Howard Hawks. So if you want absolutely everything, you will have to hang on to the DVD, but most of those materials in those two documentaries are covered elsewhere. They are partially covered on the Criterion extras. They're not essential, and if you have any of the great books on Grant or Hawks, it goes over that same information in much greater detail. But being a completionist, and because the DVD has the poster art, I'm obviously probably not going to get rid of it, of course, because I'm me, and having multiple video editions of the great masterworks of cinema is just something I do. It's how my brain is wired. But you don't have to hang on to your DVD unless you really want those two documentaries. This is just a wonderful extras package, and that combined with the lovely new art and the absolutely breathtaking audiovisual quality of the new transfer, the 4K restoration and the audio restoration, this disc is a must-own for all of those reasons, and because it is, one of the greatest films ever made. That's not. I can't possibly hype this film up too much. It's just one of the most magical and timeless of all screwball comedies. It's a film that quickly becomes a cherished favorite. It's a special film that never gets old, and it's just a film to always return to as just one of the most magical vehicles for Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, and one of the crown jewels of Howard Hawks' filmography. That is, of course, 1938's masterpiece, Bringing Up Baby, on the Criterion Spine 1085 Blu-ray release. This is, for me, one of the best Criterion Blu-rays released to date. I can find absolutely no reason why you shouldn't run out and buy this, whether it's in a Criterion sale or whether you just can't live without having this film on Blu-ray, which I was the same exact way. As soon as this got announced, I will be returning to this every single year because I always rewatch this film pretty much on a yearly basis, along with a lot of the other classics like His Girl Friday and The Awful Truth and The Philadelphia Story. But this makes a beautiful companion piece to some of those that Criterion has released. I do hope they continue. They have done some of the other great masterpieces, like one of my personal favorites, 1938's Holiday, directed by George Cukor. So it's just wonderful that we're finally getting more of the masterpiece screwball comedies on Blu-ray, and Criterion has done justice beautifully to Bringing Up Baby. This is a must-own Blu-ray release with absolutely breathtaking picture and audio quality, and it is backed up by an outstanding extras package that does port over the DVD commentary, and there's really no reason to hang on to your old releases unless you want the old documentaries on the DVD. This is a essential Blu-ray release. Be nice to see this actually get upgraded to UHD at some point, but for now, this is one of the must-own best Blu-rays yet released by the Criterion Collection. So that's my review of the Criterion Bringing Up Baby Blu-ray release. Again, it's one of my absolute most favorite, most cherished films, and I'm so beyond thrilled that it finally has a beautiful restoration on a fantastic Blu-ray release. I do really think it is one of the must-own Blu-ray discs, period. I think it's one of the must-own Criterion releases, and I think it belongs in every cinephile film fan's disc collection. So if you have any comments about the film or Criterion's release, please, by all means, leave them below. I always love talking and interacting with everybody about films or disc releases, and as always, thank you ever so much for watching. I've got to run off because I still can't find my intercostal clavicle.